And the skills half-life underpins everything around how we need to think about skill management. It's essentially a measure used to describe how long a specific skill remains useful or relevant before it starts to become outdated. So if a skill has a half-life of 5 years, that means in about 5 years, half of the knowledge or abilities related to that skill will need to be updated to stay relevant. As you can see on the right, the half-life of the skills is rapidly decreasing, and that's influenced by primarily technology, particularly AI at the moment. The average worker today needs to reskill about 9 times through their career to remain relevant. And those with the most fungible skills as frequent as every 3 years. This has doubled in the last 15 years, where in 2010, the average skill half-life is 10 years. So the average worker would reskill around 4.5 times. Now, this rate of change is only expected to increase. And when I look at the trends around skill obsolescence, I believe that by about 2030, the half-life is going to be down to 4 years. And by 2040, as short as 2 years. And this explains one of the primary factors that's contributing to the national skills shortage, because the training system can't keep up with this pace, and it can't keep up with changing industry demands. Industry can't get a clear grasp on what skills it needs for the workforce currently being built. So, leaves us in a world where almost all jobs require digital skills, but typically they're the ones with the shortest half-life. Technology is becoming increasingly accessible and it's impacting more roles. So as an example, if we don't start educating employees on critical thinking or say the ethical use of AI, then what happens when they use it incorrectly? And we're opening up new risks and potentially undiscovered risks. And trust me, I've seen a lot of organizations try and put pretty rigid policies around the use of AI. Employers will use it despite what company policy says. It's embedded everywhere and it's very, very easy to access. And I'm sure everyone's also started to notice the skill gap increasing within your own workforce, and you're finding it harder to access skilled talent in the market, finding it harder to retain people because they're looking for their next career step and they're moving outwards. There's another part that I think most of us know, but we often overlook, is the training system that's educating people for new jobs. And the way that we typically operate our businesses are based on practices that were developed to address challenges at a time where the skill half-life was around that 10 to 20 year mark. So these practices were developed when you could hire someone into a defined position and count on their skills being relevant for, let's say, 15 years without substantial ongoing investment and growth. So if we look at typical career paths, like a lot of businesses still think very linear about how a career path works. We're kind of stuck in this 1980s view of career progression. Whereas the reality is that skills can transfer and translate into like those typically very defined occupations and workforce segments. And that's changed drastically. The example on the bottom of the slide, it's an example of what happened when I actually just tried to map what my career path looked like. At any given point on that, I could take my skills and make a drastic career pivot to whatever takes my fancy at any given time. And Laura and Dylan, who are on the call, know that I get distracted very easily and I'll just go. I'll go and run at it. I'm at a point now where I might move up or I might take a drastic career change, potentially into the medical or research field, maybe even go back and take up a traineeship role. I actually don't know. So if I don't have an employer that has the capability and the ability to support me on this journey, the ability to help me grow my skills in the areas where my interests are while still contributing value back to the business, I'm going to look elsewhere. And at every one of those pivotal career moments, I'm making a change rather than staying where I am. This is a trend that we're seeing increasing. Okay? Particularly the newer generations, they're looking for much more fluid career paths. And effective skill management within an organization can actually enable this to happen. Okay, so I just want to summarize a few things. We can no longer solely rely on finding skilled talent in the market. All right, the training system simply can't keep up. Yes, there are some people with the skills in market, but that is not the sort of thing that we can rely on consistently. We can no longer rely on an individual's skills being relevant for sort of longer than 3 to 5-ish years. And maybe you actually are starting to notice a correlation between some of these timeframes and what's happening with retention in the workplace at the moment. It goes back to what I was just talking about, career paths, is if there's not a pathway or if there's not that option to grow, people look elsewhere as their skills need to be refreshed and developed. But I won't go down that rabbit hole any further. Technology is introducing new risks. Okay, introducing new risks that require ongoing learning and development, and we're talking things like AI, cloud, privacy in a world where there's more and more data being collected. As an example, I was talking to a car manufacturer a couple of weeks ago, and we sort of discovered that the risk of data compromise even 10 years ago was limited to data that they owned, corporate information. Given the amount of data that they collect on their customers and the live feeds that they're starting to get back from their modern cars now, that's changed significantly the risk that the workforce is at if something goes wrong, or the company is at when something goes wrong. And that's the same as many other industries. And the only way to mitigate that risk is to educate the workforce. And also, as we've just established on the previous slide, career pathways are no longer predefined. What all of this means is skill management and learning and development more broadly, it's no longer a nice to have or a secondary consideration for a business. It's a core strategic business function that's going to underpin the organization's ability to thrive in this increasingly volatile market that we can't predict. Unless you can automate every single task that you do in the business, people are still going to be the center of what you do. Okay? So it's not really a matter of if we're going to adopt a skills framework or skills-based workforce management or whatever you want to call it. It's a matter of when you're going to do it. And it's a matter of whether it's going to be embedded into practice before those risks start exposing themselves and become critical to normal business operations. So where do we start? We need to look at adopting this agile or growth-oriented mindset about career pathways over the standard linear progression-based mindset. We need to move away from thinking in defined skill gaps to a concept I'll talk about more in a moment, but reducing the skills lag. Tying into the skill lag point though, start thinking about what skills are needed now and how to keep them up to date. Look, the future's not here. Future skills do not exist. The best tool we've got in our toolbox is to be as up to date with our skills as possible. So when the next change comes, we're minimizing the uplift required to adapt to that change. Start thinking more about what a dynamic skills-based ecosystem is that matches employees to tasks or the jobs that need to be done across the business. Okay, right person, right skills at the right time. Over this mindset of traditional fixed job roles or job functions and filling positional based vacancies. And I know that's a big statement, a little bit daunting, but we'll go through a little bit of that as well shortly. And start really thinking about how we target career development more at the individual needs, aligned to the up-to-date needs of the organisation, rather than typically how it works now, which is an employee sort of interest-led or a directed learning pathway. Okay, let me come back to skills like, and that'll make some of those points previously come into a bit more context. So what is it and why has WithYouWithMe focused on it? So we've established that the skill landscape is evolving. What you're looking at on the right is a representation of skills that exist in market today. The skills at the top of the cluster are the new and emerging skills, and towards the bottom of the cluster are the ones that are about to sort of drop off. And they're the victims of the skill half-life we spoke about before. At the moment, there's no doubting employees want to learn, they want to build new skills, struggling with time, prioritization, the what or the how to progress. It's always a bit of a battle. Learning is often very self-directed. It's easily misaligned with the company's needs because it's based on conversations between the individual and the manager, not necessarily linked into what the business is planning, the direction it's going. And further to this, like, I've certainly done this. I only used to think about my personal skilling when I was looking at my next career move. So what do I need to do for that next career move, whether it's moving up, whether it's moving or moving out or making a career change. So that means we're always sort of looking towards what's our next job. We're trying to figure out what we should be doing. So where do we look? We look at job descriptions. We jump on Seek or Indeed and start looking at what people are asking for. But question is, who's actually seen up-to-date job descriptions that accurately represent what's required of the role, the tasks that need to be done? Where those job descriptions are written at a point in time, they're static, and they're very often written for like that 99th percentile ideal candidate that doesn't actually need that person to do the job that needs to be done. So the people who are doing that upskilling, they're selecting skills towards the bottom of the cluster because they're not up to date and they're not an accurate representation of current employable skills. So how do we go about this? We've sort of come up with this methodology, which is based around these 3 key steps. So clarity, capability, and closure. So first things first, and I've sort of said this a few times already, we need clarity on what skills are needed for the tasks that need to be done. So we're selecting the most relevant skills. We're keeping this up to date. We're removing all of the noise that's associated with job descriptions and duty statements to set a very defined and current demand signal. So idea of capability is about giving employees the ability to self-assess their skills, measure up against that demand signal, enable manager and employee alignment conversations on skill fit and where the upskilling opportunities are. Creates a map of what the current team looks like against the desired future state, or the desired current state for that matter. In our specific case, and WithYouWithMe's case, we combine a lot of that with aptitude and psychometric data of the individuals, coupled with organisational demand and a picture of the organisation's skill risk, so where you're carrying most of the risk, to develop tailored and individualised learning plans that motivate employees to take more proactive steps through their learning journey. And that's sequenced by what they're most likely to be successful in. So it's that starting to develop that living and breathing individualised learning plan that presents relevant here and now options that justify investment from the company to the individual that they can start working through, and collectively starting to uplift the organization's skill position, where we're at against that skill lag. So we're no longer sort of lagging behind what's happening in market. We're starting to reduce that. And then ultimately start closing the skill gaps. And I know I said before, stop thinking in skill gaps. Well, we start closing these individual skill gaps, we start getting them closer. What we're doing is reducing how far the organization's lagging behind what's happening in market, what the current trends are, what the current technology are. So when we do need to do the next uplift, that burden is smaller. So let's review this journey. So the organization has, once we go through clarity, the organization has clarity on skill demand. We understand the capabilities that we've already got, okay? And we've identified where the gaps are that are contributing to how far we're lagging behind. And we start to take all of this insight into a closure strategy. Okay? So coupled with in our case, once again, that the employee's understanding of an employee's potential to learn, grow new skills, matched against that skill demand, we can start making some very informed decisions. So do we borrow skills from other departments? Do we go to market and buy new skills? So are we hiring new people in? Do we contract it out to reduce the demand on that skill on our existing workforce, create new capacity? Do we grow the existing workforce through informal learning, mentoring matched with a suitable mentor with the right skills and the right personality match? Are we doing on-the-job training, short courses that you might already have access to? Do we invest in formal learning? Do we send people off to university or TAFE to build new skills because they've been identified as critical? Or do we actually start taking a broader look at the organization? Like, is the organization's structure fit for purpose? Do we reduce the demand on skills by automating some of those tasks to reduce the need, because we're not getting them? They're not in market. We can't grow our workforce. Now, all of these things are decisions that are currently being made without a lot of good data to support what the most effective strategy is going to be. And ultimately, that's what we've built our software platform for. So the software platform, the potential platform, is sort of the culmination of all of our learnings, which have led to this thinking, to fill that gap that's in the HR stack and create a meaningful connection between individuals and the business, but in a growth-oriented way. Now, I don't normally add this slide into these types of presentations to avoid it becoming a sales pitch. Having said that, I wanted to bring it up because whilst in the center there, it's talking about our software platform, replace that with effective skills management. And this view is just as accurate. What this methodology enables and what the insights are supporting is actually quite wide-reaching and impactful. There's a whole practice called organizational development, which is striving to achieve this, and it's been designed, and some of the largest companies have dedicated teams working through all of this. And I'm sure there's multiple things on this slide that each of you are seeing that are currently being run as disparate functions throughout the business, with no real common thread tying them together. Well, that common thread's actually the skills that underlie it and the people that are implementing those skills against the tasks. We're starting to see HR, I use that as a very broad term, covering all of the practices, but we're starting to see HR get increasingly recognized as like an actual pillar of the organization's strategic business plan for these reasons, warranting the same level of investment and attention as like areas like sales or service delivery, in the place of where it's historically been, which is that supporting business function. So supporting the execution of the business function. That change is slow. It's relatively few and far between. Now, I've scratched the surface on some of the reasons on why that transition is important and how taking that skills-based view of workforce management starts to build the connection between a lot of these things, and I'm more than happy to take questions on some of these individual points that are shown. But it sort of shows how that skills view of an organization really underpins everything and has the ability to drive meaningful results for the business, mitigate future risk, and make sure that we are going to be able to adapt to what's happening in that volatile market. How do we adapt to the next big thing that's going to cause a crisis? ROI of all of this, ultimately, it comes down to the number of skill gaps we closed. It doesn't matter what strategy you apply to closing skill gaps, because collectively reducing that skill gap is reducing that organization's lag. I mean, it lag behind what's happening in market. It's giving employees options. It's giving employees the ability to move and grow. And in turn, that's going to impact a whole plethora of key performance measures. So we're talking productivity, time to implement change, culture, innovation, retention, employee satisfaction, and like the list goes on. So having that workforce that is collectively upskilling against a current demand signal, that are having those meaningful conversations, that are being exposed to career growth options within their organization, it's giving them control over their career decisions. And it's going to have a lot of impact on the organization, particularly moving forward. Okay, I've covered a lot at a relatively high level. If I strip it back, there's three things that I think is really important to sort of take away when we're starting to think about skills mapping, when we're starting to think about building that understanding of our workforce at the skill level and how we're going to implement it. So skills half-life that I was talking through at the front, and those of you that might have missed that slide, I encourage you to jump onto the recording when we send that out and rewatch that first bit, because that skills half-life has a real impact on the business. If you incorporate that thinking into your forward planning, see how it changes your mindset or what solutions you're starting to put on the table. See how it changes the mindset of the organization and those around you when they're doing their forward planning and their business planning. Focus on growth. Adopt a growth mindset. There's a lot of resources about growth mindset out there. So how is what you're doing now laying the foundations to enable sustainable and ongoing workforce growth for the unknown of tomorrow? And strip away all of the noise. Start by focusing on what tasks actually need to be done and what skills are needed to do those tasks before you launch into anything around skills mapping. And I've seen this so many times. If you don't have that level of clarity, you're at risk of building something that's not fit for purpose or sustainable, and it's going to become very cumbersome to maintain. And it's very important to distinguish between the actual needs for those tasks versus the perceived needs. A lot of professionals, we're all guilty of it. We play up on how important specific skills are for our role, how much they weight on our role, when in fact, when you really break it down, it doesn't match. So that's going to help us make those informed decisions. It's also going to maximize the investment that we put into it, and it all comes back to the dollars, right? How it is maximize the investment and show that clear clear link between ROI for the activities that you're doing. Yeah, I did say it was a bit of a whirlwind tour. The one last point, obviously, keep us in mind, like if you're going on this journey and want to explore any of this in more of a level of detail with us, please let us know. We've been doing this globally across military, public, private sector, and I'd love to pick up the conversation with you. Look, I'll send you a follow-up email. I'll send you the link to the recording later this afternoon. If you do have something specific that you wanted to discuss with us, I think Laura can drop a link to my calendar in the chat, and that'll allow you to book a meeting with me whenever you choose to. Otherwise, thank you very much for attending. I hope I was able to give you something out of this that's useful and at least worth scratching the surface on further.